This episode is brought to you by Top Notch Cattle Company, raising high-quality registered red and gray Brahman cattle. Contact Baxter Whitworth at 903-649-9155 or at bbwtopnotchcattle@gmail.com.
I think some of these guys that go over medium well, it's like, what are we doing?
Around 60 to 70% of ranchers' input cost is feed. Welcome to the Cattle Innovation Station podcast,
bringing you the innovative new ways of the cattle industry.
We're your hosts, Baxter Whitworth and Paul Hayes. Together, we're going to be interviewing leaders within the cattle industry.
Here on this podcast, our focus is honoring God and innovating the cattle industry. Get ready to listen, learn, and laugh as we help innovate the cattle industry.
Let's get innovating. It's time for another episode of the Cattle Innovation Station podcast, where we keep you current on beef cattle industry events, help you innovate your herd to turn a profit, and help innovate the beef cattle industry so we can feed more people on less land. I'm your host, Baxter Whitworth, and as always, joining me today is my pal, your other host, Paul Hayes. In this episode, we're going to be interviewing Dr. Jon DeClerck. Dr. DeClerck is the Executive Vice President of the American Simmental Association, where he leads one of the largest and most progressive beef breeds in the organizations across the country. At the core of his work is the International Genetic Solutions, the world's most comprehensive multi-breed genetic evaluations. And it analyzes data on more than 23 million animals across 25 breed associations. A Texas A&M graduate, Dr. DeClerck earned his master's and PhD from Texas Tech University. Before joining the American Simmental Association, he served as a technical consultant for Purina Animal Nutrition and as a livestock judging coach for both Iowa State and Texas Tech. He led 3 national champion teams, becoming the first coach in history to achieve that distinction after also competing on the national champion teams at 3 levels of 4-H, junior college, and senior college. Dr. DeClerck, we're glad to have you. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thank you, gentlemen, for having me. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yes, sir. We're excited as well. Paul, how are you?
Absolutely. I'm great, Baxter. How are you doing?
I'm good. Well, can you help us get to know Dr. DeClerck today?
I'd love to. Dr. DeClerck, we know that you travel a lot for your job. You get to fly all over the country and a little bit internationally as well. So we'd love to know, what's your favorite airline that you get to fly with all the time?
Well, Paul, that's a good question. I'll tell you that I like hate starting off negative, but I probably would be better off telling you what my least favorite airline is. So I would say most favorite would probably be either Delta or Southwest. Both of them do a nice job. They're a little bit more friendly. I probably fly, I don't know, 4 or 5 times a month, or a month, kind of it's a lot. So when you get delays, it's just how customer service they have. And I feel like those two probably do a little better job than others. I like the free check bags, at least for now, with Southwest, and then free internet on Delta. So those are 2 tough ones to beat. My least favorite would be American. I probably fly American a lot, but that's definitely my least favorite.
Well, that's good to know. Next time I travel anywhere, if we need to go out of the state to interview somebody, I know what airline to fly with.
Yeah, those are 2 good ones.
Thanks. And then, being in the beef industry, we all love a good steak. What's your favorite way? How do you like your steak cooked? And what's your favorite cut of steak?
I would say a ribeye. I'm pretty easy to, like, if I go to a restaurant, if I'm hungry, I get a ribeye. If I'm not very hungry, I might get the filet. But I just love the spinalis of the ribeye. It's by far my favorite part. You can't beat it. I usually go medium rare. I think that's the best way of doing it. I think some of these guys that go over medium well, it's like, what are we doing? So it's like we cook all the flavor out of them. So Yeah, I like medium rare. That'd be kind of where I'd be at.
I absolutely agree with you. That's how I like my steak.
I've seen people say that they didn't raise cattle just for you to cook your steak well done so.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like,
Sorry.
we have like the highest consumer demand for beef we've had since 1988, right? Like super high consumer demand, and it's the taste of beef that really delineates us in the market. Like when you go eat poultry or chicken, it's always the spice and what they put on it, right? You've really got to season it just right because it's kind of a bland meat. The great thing I'm sure we all would agree about a steak is like you hardly don't have to put anything on it. If you cook a steak right, it doesn't need anything to just have an incredible flavor. Now you can maybe accent a little bit of taste here and there with something you put on it, but that flavor is what separates us in the marketplace. So I'm right there with both you boys. It's like don't cook all of it out, right? If you want to do that, there's probably a cheaper protein source you can go get.
I absolutely agree. My grandpa definitely follows that motto. He barely even cooks his steak just to where it's healthy enough to eat.
145 degrees.
Yes. Oh, so next we like to ask some questions that we just like to ask everyone just to help to get us to know you and just kind of see learn more about you. So, will you tell us some of the events that have happened in your life that have shaped you into who you are today?
Yeah, so yeah, I'm such a lucky guy. And I hit my knees to talk to God every night. I have no idea how I've been fortunate enough to get to where I've been at. There's several things that really probably changed the trajectory of my life. I'd be very similar to you two. Like showing cattle really ignited my scientific curiosity. I grew up on a cow calf operation in Illinois. My dad, we ran commercial cows when I was a kid, and we started showing. And because if I got into showing, I wanted to learn how to breed better cattle. I wanted to learn how to feed them a lot better. I was a really bad at feeding show cattle. Probably made about every mistake in the book, and perhaps that's why I was so dogmatic and getting a PhD in nutrition because I wanted to right all the wrongs that I probably made when I was growing up. But that opened a lot of doors for me and to get into livestock judging, which gave me the chance to get to go to college for free and on scholarships. And I grew up in a small town in Western Illinois and got a chance to do a lot of different things. I would say that the thing that really probably elevated me even and more was I got a chance to do my undergrad at A&M and was very fortunate there. But Dr. Ryan Rathman and getting to go to Texas Tech and just to get him as a mentor, is difficult to overstate. The impact that guy's had on my life. I wasn't born with a big last name or a big cow herd, a lot of money, but the Lord afforded me something far greater, and that was a mentor, Dr. Rathman. And Ryan is somebody that is a fantastic evaluator. He shared the same passion that I had for judging and evaluation, but he's really a guy that has an incredible intellectual, just brain power and cognition for science. And sometimes when you're growing up, it's just the cool thing to do is to try to win a show or to be in that in crowd. And when I got to go to Texas Tech and get to learn under Ryan, he really changed the trajectory of my life away from, still livestock judging was neat and selection and those traits were something that I enjoyed, but was able to kind of foster a path more towards, let's take some of the scientific principles that we're learning and use it in selection and what can we do to propel the actual beef industry forward. So I would say those two things probably had as big of an impact on my life as anything: showing cattle and getting an opportunity to be mentored by Dr. Athman.
That's an awesome story, and I believe that when we're given opportunities like that, it's just great to be able to take it and run with it and build on it, and like you have, and I'm sure that's why you've gotten to where you are. It's because you've taken those and just took them as learning experiences and kept going. Like you were talking about making almost every mistake in the book on feeding show cattle and being being mad, and that's how you learned how to do it, do stuff. I think that a passion that drives me especially is when you're mad about not being able to do something right, it just makes you have a fire lit in you to keep digging and learn how to do it right. And I think that's awesome.
Yeah, I think that's the cool thing about the show ring and livestock judging both is that it can foster competitiveness, right? And that competitive drive, if individuals use it correctly, right, can be used to propel success in other facets, right? I took that same competitiveness to what I did in the course, in the classroom and on my coursework, and I was fortunate enough to get a PhD and have some opportunities to continue to excel. And I did the same thing when I was a nutritionist, and that kind of just approach to wanting to be the absolute best and kind of always pushing myself to be successful, just like you're doing, Paul. Has really served me well in life. And I'll tell you, like I said, it was great to kind of get that at an early age, and then to get the right kind of mentor. Dr. Ryan, who is a confidant of mine, and Dr. Athman's a guy that, like when I was applying or the Simmental job came open, I thought honestly, I almost didn't apply. I didn't think that I never worked for a breed association before. It's like, why are they going to let me run this breed association? I'm not a geneticist. Why are they going to let me run the largest genetic evaluation in the world? And, they always say that Satan is the accuser, that voice in your head that says you're not good enough. That's coming from down below. It's definitely not coming from up above. And when I thought I probably wouldn't even throw my hat in the ring because I didn't want to make Farina mad, it was Dr. Ryan Rathman convinced me to bet on myself and to bet on myself. And I'm really glad I did.
That's amazing.
Infinity Cattle Services, owned by Chris Shivers, is glad to be a sponsor of the Cattle Innovation Station podcast. Infinity Cattle Services, a unique, vision-driven, service-oriented company committed to developing successful revenue-producing cattle operations, is a full-service consulting and marketing firm specializing in Brahman and Brahman-influenced cattle. Contact them today to learn more about how they can assist you with locating cattle, cattle mating, sale management, marketing, communications, record keeping, data submission, and a wide array of other services. They can be reached at 713-202-1747. Again, that's 713-202-1747, or at infinitycattleservices@gmail.com. That is infinitycattleservices@gmail.com. Visit their website at infinitycattle.com or check them out on Facebook and Instagram. Have you been looking for a place to buy top quality AI sire semen or collect a bull of your own? Well, look no further than Elgin Breeding Services. Located in Elgin, Texas, Elgin Breeding Service is not only one of the best breeding services in the business, but also has superior customer service. Contact them at ebsbull@elginbreedingservices.com or by phone at 512-285-2019. Again, that's 512-285-2019. And visit their website at elginbreedingservice.com.
You've talked a ton about judging livestock and raising livestock, and then when you've coached at Tech, leading it in its only undefeated season ever. That's correct, right?
Yeah, so I judged at A&M, and my judging team at A&M was the only undefeated team ever to win the national championship.
Oh, at A&M, gotcha.
3 national champion teams there at Tech, yep. Mm-hmm.
Well, that's amazing. So, coming from an expert like you who has great success in that, what selection traits do you think are the most important in selecting beef cattle, and why?
Yeah, so I think lots of times, that's a highly subjective question in terms of like what's going to win in the show ring, right? But there are some traits that are everlasting that never go out of style, and that would be just functionality, practicality, the combination of structure and body and just the ability to thrive out in a forage-based environment. I think the idea should be that look and balance are highly subjective, right? We could open up a page to the Showtimes and look at a group of champions, and there'd be 10 cattle in there, and I might walk through 20 people and say, what's your favorite animal? And I might get 9 different answers of what the best looking animal from the side is. And that's why there's multiple different pickups, or some people that think a Dodge is the best looking pickup. Some people think it's the Ford. It's not like we have different eyes. It's not like I look at that red Ford and see a red Ford, and you look at it and see a red Dodge, right? I mean, we're seeing the same exact thing. It's just to our eye, there are certain traits that are more appealing. So look to me subjective. I think lots of times when you go in the show ring, you have to understand that. But the traits that really matter, the traits that are really going to set together a fundamental breeding program are structure and practicality, cattle that can survive in a limited, kind of in a forage-based environment and thrive. And the idea to me should be that everybody can agree on that, right? Now, once we make them practical and sound, do we want to make them real stout, or do we want to make them super long necked, or just overly sappy bellied? That kind of comes down to personal preference. But the fundamental building blocks of any breeding cattle program is going to be structure. And what I think is so nice about what we have in the cattle business, maybe relative to our friends in the sheep and the goats and the hog world, is that there are still people that are judging steer shows and cattle shows that make a living selling commercial bulls. And so, not saying that Kevin Jensen doesn't like him, great looking, but Kevin Jensen's also being informed by, hey, if I raised a bunch of bulls that look like that steer, I'm going out of business. Like, they don't work in the real world. Those aren't the kind that thrive in production. And I think that blend of academics, folks that are running breed associations, that judge shows, and commercial cattlemen getting an opportunity to step out in the middle of the ring kind of keeps us a little bit more centered and balanced. Sometimes where you look at some of the other species maybe that take awesome silhouettes in the pictures, and they are really extreme in some areas, but they've lost some of that production sense, right? They're maybe not as practical just out in the real world setting. They've done that because they've divorced themselves from maybe the production and the commercial side of the industry.
Absolutely. I really love what you touched on right there, Than, how judges are looking, especially in the cattle industry, how some judges are looking for the cattle to be practical. I really think that that's just an awesome thing to look for, because when I look at cattle, at least, I have my own operation of registered Brahman cattle, and when I'm showing them, when I'm out there competing, and when I'm raising them up and picking which ones I'm going to show or not, I'm saying, well, which one am I going to use after the show ring? Not which one's going to probably win the most in the show ring because it has the prettiest front, but which one is the soundest? Which one has the best structure that's going to last me the longest? And which one's going to produce me the most calves? And I really think that that's just an awesome thing that judges can look for, because when we look for that, that really, like you said, centers us back towards picking the cattle that are going to help us in the actual operation of raising cattle.
Yeah, absolutely. Reproduction is the trait that has the most economic importance at a commercial cow-calf operation. And we've got a little under 28 million beef cows in the country, and the number one thing that's going to affect every one of those commercial producers is how many live calves they get on the ground. I'd much rather, if I had 100 cows, sell 95 calves that wean off at 450 than 60 calves that wean off at 550, right? Because I still got more
Absolutely.
total pounds of weaning weight when I get more live calves. And so naturally, you talked about it, Paul. That's why when we look at genetic evaluations, like the trait that really kind of surfaces, like in our all-purpose index and a lot of these maternal indices, are stayability, which is the likelihood that a cow remains in production for 6 years. Cattle Facts kind of tells us that a cow has got to have 4.5 calves before she breaks even. So that initial development cost and not selling her as a feeder heifer, which she's worth a lot of money this year, kind of run her on grass for a year where she doesn't have calves, like, you sink a lot of development costs into her. So it takes 4.5 calves on average for you to break even on her. She's got to get, to year 6 to 5th calf before I start to make a profit. And so having the structure and the practicality to where she is more likely to breed back is really important. Now we all know it's impossible to look at a heifer and just tell like she's fertile. I don't have X-ray vision. I can't like look into her and see what her ovaries and her, is doing, her hypothalamus and her pituitary gland, and if we're going to be, stimulating hormones at the right time. But I can look at that heifer's practicality and figure out, like, is she one that structurally and practically speaking should be able to hold up on grass?
Absolutely. And one of the reasons, I know we're going to talk about this later, the benefits of the Simbra industry, because you're in the Simmental and we're in the Brahmins. One of the biggest things I love about Brahmins is their longevity. Brahmins, I think, live maybe 2 or 3 years longer than I'm not exactly sure on that statistic, but I'm pretty sure Brahmins live maybe 2 or 3 years longer than the average animal, the average cattle, and that'll get you 2-3 more 2-3 more calves on the ground that you can continue to profit off of. And I think when you can mix the longevity of a Brahmin with the traits that Angus and Simmental bring to the table, I think that that's just just an overall great combo that can continue to just feed money into your pocket and keep you going as a rancher.
Absolutely.
So, and next we're going to move into our discussion topics, and Baxter's going to start us off on there.
Are you looking for high quality hay that is priced well? Then make sure to visit Threadgill Hay Company. They have fertilized horse jigs and Tifton 85. They carry square bales and round bales. Their square bales are $8 a bale, and their 4x6 round bales are $50 per roll. That's a nice price and good quality. They're located outside of Mount Enterprise, Texas, and they will gladly give you more details when you contact them. Speaking of contacting them, you can reach out by texting Sawyer Poole at 903-646-4741 or Ronald Threadgill at 903-235-2011. Have you been looking for Brahman cattle with a good genetic background? Contact 79 Cattle Company, selling reliable Brahman replacement heifers, Brahman show prospects, and Brahman bulls. Contact Taylor Tate at 210-241-4511. Again, that's 210-241-4511. Or contact Mallory Tate at 210-861-0155, 210-861-0155. All right. Well, to start us off, you have a PhD in nutrition, and we are infinitely curious about nutrition because, around 60 to 70% of ranchers' input cost is feed. And so any way we can lower that is always going to be helpful to your bottom line. So the first thing we want to know is, why is feed efficiency even important to begin with? I know I kind of mentioned something right there, but other than that, why is feed efficiency important?
Well, as you mentioned, it's one of the biggest costs that we're going to have in the cattle industry, right? And if you look at it, basically everything that we're going to get paid on in a cow-calf operation is the ability for a cow to get bred. And there's a tremendous amount of data out there that suggests that, it's not rocket science. When most of us go home and we preg check, the cows that are open are the skinny cows, right? The harder doing cows, the cows that are in thinner body condition score. Research study after research study, university after university will show you that, hey, a cow in a body condition score 5 or 6 will breed up at 90% rate, and then those cows around a 4 are probably going to be south of 50. And when we look at what the value of calves are today, that is a huge, huge loss that you take when you get a cow that's maybe a little thin, isn't as feed efficient, whether that's converting forage into flesh, or maybe just not as feed efficient at the grain supplement or the protein supplement that we're going to be feeding her. So naturally, where in the end, I might have a PhD, but I never able was to crack the nut on how you take one of those cows that eats feed for a full year and never has a calf and make any money out of her. You take one of those cows that you got a year's worth of feed and doesn't calve. Well, that's pretty tough to figure out how to pencil her out into the profitability standpoint. So most of the time, feed efficiency on the cow standpoint matters to us because if it's going to coincide with reproductive success. Obviously, when we start thinking about feed efficiency and cows and how they lactate or how calves are going to gain and grow, that's really important too. We don't want to be pouring in resources into an animal that's not going to gain well. I mean, it's the same thing if I got two vehicles and I'm trying to get from Houston to, let's say, to Dallas, right? And I've got the same level of gas, and one of those vehicles is getting 40 miles to the gallon, and the other vehicle is only getting 25 miles a gallon. My goal is just to get from one place to the other. Well, if it's the same exact vehicle, I'm for sure going to like the one that's more fuel efficient, that can get 40 miles to the gallon if it's the same exact vehicle. And most of the time on our cow herds, we can have animals of comparable size. We can have animals of comparable maintenance requirements, and there still can be vast differences in just their ability to convert feed to gain or feed to flesh, feed to finish if it's a steer, feed to fat if it's a cow, and we're trying to get her in better body condition reserves, because we all know when they calve, they're going to go in a negative energy balance. Like when they're in peak lactation, it really doesn't matter. Like you can have the best grass in America and they're still going to lose some weight. So we need to build up some fat restores and fat reserves. And obviously feed efficiency is going to be paramount to doing that.
That's right. And, you saying after calving, that just makes me think, some of my favorite cows that I've shown, they've had a calf, and 4 days after, they look just as good as they did. And 7 days after, they look even better than they did before they had a calf. And it's just like, wow, and that to me shows that a cow's going to be very feed efficient and going to be a very good mother. And when I see a cow do that, that's what impresses me the most.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, now that we know why feed efficiency is important, I guess the next thing we need to talk about is how we can increase feed efficiency in a herd. And so the first thing within that I think that would be great to understand is what we need to breed for. I know Paul talked to you about selection traits earlier, but specifically to feed efficiency, what are the traits that we need to be looking for to help cattle be more feed efficient? Not only just to gain more, but also to require less.
Well, so that's a good question. And I'll tell you that a lot of our feed efficiency traits that we have from an EPD standpoint are solely formulated on cattle, how they gain on grain. Okay, so if you think about it from just a sheer mechanic standpoint, myself as a nutritionist, as a scientist, it's a lot easier for me to figure out how feed efficient an animal is when I'm controlling what they eat. When I put it in a feed bunk, I know exactly what they eat. When I kick them out on grass, I don't know how much they eat. They might be how much they're eating or what they're eating, right? Most of our pastures are not a monoculture. There's hundreds or, all sorts of different species of grass out there, and cattle are no different than you and I. Baxter, if you and I went to pizza buffet, all right, and we went up there and we sat back down, I doubt our plates are going to look the exact same. I'll bet you're going to have a couple different types of pizza on there than what I have. Maybe, you've got to want a little bit of everything, and maybe I kind of went all pepperoni and just one or two other, right? And so cows, when we turn them out on grass, so much of maybe what we anticipate to be feed efficiency is actually selectivity. The cows that we think are more feed efficient are just better at selecting the more nutritionally dense grass. And, I know when we think about environmental differences, there's some different things that happen in that regard. Sometimes cows that grow up in an area, their gut is just programmed to develop that or to digest that grass because they've ate that kind of grass their entire life. Their mothers ate that grass when those cows were in utero. When they were calves, they ate that grass. So their gut is kind of programmed to digest that. but then also they've been there long enough to kind of know that that's the good grass. Go ahead and eat it. And you always hear ranchers talk about during drought, they go buy cows from different parts of the country and bring them in to their place. There can be all sorts of grass out there for those cows to eat, and they still might lose weight for a while because their gut's not set up to digest that grass. And sometimes they don't know the difference between the weeds and the good grass anyway. So it almost takes them a year or two to figure that out. So most of our feed efficiency, EPDs and genetics and anything that we're going to be looking at is going to be tailored towards how do cattle gain on feed. Because if that feed is in a bunk, I can measure how much they're eating every day. For me as a scientist, I can take samples of that feed and I know exactly how much calories in there, how much protein, how much vitamins, how much minerals. So I've got a really good idea to know how those cattle are going to gain and what their feed efficiency is. So there is a lot of breed association data out there that talks about mostly like residual average daily gain or residual feed intake. And that is basically, how much better or worse than you are than, what the average animal is. Like we are calculating what your average daily gain is. We're calculating what your feed to gain efficiency should be based on the diet and how much you ate. And this EPD is going to going to basically project which animals are more or less feed efficient. Now, what I'll tell you, Baxter, is one thing to keep in mind. I feel like anytime we breed cattle, there's always several, there's no easy free lunch, right? There's always, if you select a lot for one thing, there's going to be a counterbalance there, right? If I want nothing but muscle, I'm probably going to breed a little marbling out of them, because when I take that, 14-inch ribeye and stretch it out to an 18-inch ribeye, all of a sudden there looks like there's less marbling, right? Think about a chocolate chip cookie. If that cookie's this big around and there's 10 chips in there, I'm like, boy, there's a lot of chips. If I stretch that chocolate chip cookie to this big and there's still 10 chips, it doesn't look like near as many chips in there, right? Well, it's the same thing with marbling. Like we take a ribeye that's 14 inches, maybe that's a choice ribeye. You spread it out to an 18-inch ribeye, then all of a sudden, even though there's the same amount of marbling, it's just been diluted over a larger surface area. Maybe that animal grades select. So, there's always counterbalances to what we're doing here. So when we breed for cattle that are going to be very feed efficient, that's basically going to be how they gain on grain. That's not necessarily a harbinger or how they're going to gain on grass. I had a customer that I used to work with when I was a nutritional consultant, and he would do a gain test with his bulls on feed, and we'd feed those cattle in a bunk, and then he kicked them out on grass and did a gain test there. And the great thing about the grass, it was an irrigated pasture, and it was a monoculture. He planted it, so there was no difference in selectivity. Every bull out there was eating the same level of grass, and it was wild how some of the cattle that did the best on grain might have done as poor as anything on grass, and vice versa. Now, most of the time there was a pretty good overlap, but there was quite a few cattle that would really re-rank in some of that regard. So that's something to keep in mind. I think sometimes ranchers will get frustrated when they're like, man, I bought this bull and he was on a C-lock or he was on a grow safe system and they got dry matter intake records, and I'm looking at his indexes here. I'm looking at what his feed efficiency records are. Boy, he's still melted out on pasture. Well, his gut might be set up to really digest corn and soybean meal and distiller's grains or whatever it may be, but it might not be oriented the best to gain on grass, and it might be that bull's just not very good at eating grass. He might be eating the bad grass or the grass with less nutrients to it.
EP Cattle Company. Owned by Eddie Wilson, EP Cattle Company is home of Sir Rouse Handshake. Rouse Handshake is a sound-structured, heavy-muscled bull that is really bold-ribbed, so it comes with no surprise that he is a Fort Worth and San Antonio Junior Show Division Champion and Rio Grande Valley Open Show Division Champion. He is a grandson of BRC Noble and JDH Shank Manso, and is also a great-grandson of Mr. H. Elijah Manso. You can contact Eddie Wilson or Nicole Wilson on Facebook at EP Cattle Company. So remember, if you're looking for some well-performing, registered Brahman genetics, contact Eddie Wilson on Facebook.
Right, and that's That's interesting. I haven't thought about the ones picking out what grass they eat. I guess I've never even thought about, them making their own choices for food like we do. But that's an interesting thought that I haven't thought of. And how I'm just curious because you talk about there traits can play a role, but also selectivity, like we just said. How can you maybe kind of tell as a cow calf producer that maybe can't spend money on a growth safe system at their own location? How can you kind of see which cattle you should be breeding and using that might enhance your feed efficiency within your herd?
Well, I would tell you, Baxter, with feed efficiency, it's about like everything. This is something that probably surprises most people. The cattle that are really feed efficient, okay? So like if I'm trying to do a feed to gain, like when I would work with feed yards and was consulting for them, the cattle lots of times that had the greatest feed to gain efficiency were extremely shallow bodied. All right. So the thing to keep in mind is that 40% of an animal's maintenance requirement, so 40% of the calories that they need go to just supporting the gut, the rumen, the small intestine, the entire gastrointestine, the gut, and the liver. All right. So like 40% of calories go to that. So part of the reasons dairy cattle are very feed inefficient. In order to milk that hard, they've got a lot of organ mass. So you think about dairy cattle, they got this big, huge gut because they got to eat so much feed in order to milk. And so those steers that are out of Holstein cows, they inherit that big gut. They inherit that big liver. They also have a bigger lung and heart and all that other sort of stuff, right? So from a feed efficiency standpoint, in a traditional feed yard, a Holstein steer is probably going to be north of 8-1 from a feed to gain standpoint. And I might pick a really shallow bodied kind of one that's kind of real, tubular, and his feed efficiency might be closer to 5.5-1. All right. Because if he's got less smaller organs, which means that there's, it's a closed loop system. So he's got more of those calories that he eats can be left over to fuel gain. Now, what I would tell you, Baxter, is it's all about striking the middle ground. Okay. So for me, when I was working with feed yards, the problem with those really shallow bodied cattle is lots of times they couldn't eat enough feed to gain fast enough. And then the yardage would eat into the profits, right? So like those cattle might be the most feed efficient cattle in the yards, but it would take them an extra 30 days or maybe 45 days to finish out because maybe those big gutted cattle could eat, 3% of their body weight or 2.5% of their body weight. And those, shallow bodied kind of old school might be eating, 1.7. Bigger frame, tubular cattle, not modern, okay? Cattle like that are a little bit shallower, lots of times have the best feed efficiency, but the problem is they can't eat enough sometimes to gain an effective level in a feed yard. On a cow-calf level, it's the same way too. Like I've got to have a bigger GI tract, a bigger rumen for those cows in order to eat enough grass so that they can actually put on flesh. Now, as I get more gut, I actually generally going to lose some feed efficiency. So it's about finding the middle ground. Brahmins are a perfect example of this. Part of the way that Brahmin cattle remain heat tolerant is because they've got a 15% lower maintenance requirement than normal cattle because they have a smaller gut. They've got smaller organ size. So in the summer when it's 110 degrees, they can eat 15% less grass than normal, than a Boss Taurus cattle. And as a consequence, we all know when you digest food, it creates heat, right? We've all heard about the meat sweats before. And so since Brahmin, a 1,400-pound Brahmin cow, is going to eat 15% less feed than a Simmental or an Angus or a Hereford, all right, she's not going to create as much body heat from digestion, and that helps keep her more heat tolerant. That's part of the way she can survive in these tougher environments. So, we always sometimes think about feed efficiency, and you talk to generally people, and they'll look at a real big-bodied cow, and they're like, boy, she's efficient. Like, probably not. She's probably not as efficient maybe as what you would anticipate in terms of, the amount of grass that she's eating to convert into flesh. She's maybe not as efficient as what you might think of, but she's still a really good cow that probably better fits the environment because she's got a bigger, gut, a bigger rumen to where she can eat enough grass to put on some fat. It might not be as efficient as some of those other cattle in terms of the actual conversion, but we need to kind of strike that middle ground. So I don't want to go too far one way or the other. I kind of got derailed here when I was thinking earlier. One thing I was talking about, that when we select only for feed efficiency, okay, just like if I only select for ribeye area, I'm going to hurt marbling. If I only select for ribeye area, I'm going to probably make them big shouldered and have bad calving ease. Well, one of the negatives of selecting solely for feed efficiency in the feed yard is we've actually inadvertently selected for animals with smaller organ size. And that has had a pernicious effect on the health of cattle from a feedlot standpoint. So I'm sure you hear, Baxter, you're a very sharp young man, a lot about bovine congestive heart failure, like right-sided heart attacks. We're seeing a lot more cattle in the feed yard that are dying of heart attacks. And part of that comes because of, we've added about 300 pounds of outweight to cattle over the last 30 years, but the size of their hearts have not gotten any bigger, really. And as a consequence, just like if I'm 100 pounds overweight, I'm more likely to have a heart attack. Well, we get these cattle bigger and we've not grown the size of their hearts. Partially, I think, because we're not utilizing crossbreeding and heterosis as much to make them to improve that. But at the same time, I think sometimes if we select for feed efficiency, we inadvertently select for animals with smaller organs because those are more feed efficient. And that hurts not only right-sided heart failure, but it hurts respiratory disease too. So about, you look at it, it's amazing that, about 25% of cattle in the country every year are going to get respiratory disease. And, that has not gotten any better in the last 30 years. And even though we got better vaccines, better technology, Baxter, you love coming to A&M, Texas A&M short cattle course. Doesn't matter if you go there or NCBA or, cattle raisers or any cattle convention. There's all sorts of classes on how to identify calves before they get sick. How do we get these calves, so that knowledge gaps are less. We've got better technology than ever, yet we still got as many cattle getting respiratory disease today. And again, I think it's because our size of lungs have not gotten bigger in our cattle over the last 30 years, even though our weights of mature cow weights have gotten a lot bigger, and definitely our harvest weights of steers have gotten a lot bigger. And I think that's, again, we're not utilizing crossbreeding like we ought to. And then by selecting maybe for feed efficiency, maybe a little bit too much in some cases, we're actually inadvertently selecting for animals with smaller lungs, smaller hearts that are going to be more prone to respiratory disease, sickness, and then, potentially heart failure as we extend days on feed. So just like everything, Baxter, and breeding livestock, it's a balance, right? I don't want to select for only feed efficient cattle because if they're really feed efficient, their guts might not be big enough to gain enough in a feed yard or to harvest enough grass to have enough flesh on them as cows to breed back. But at the same time, I don't want them to be so deep-bodied and pus-gutted that they end up like a dairy cow where they've got these big, huge organs. And then, it takes me just way more feed to keep them in the right kind of condition. So a balance of both is actually where we want to be at.
That's interesting, and we're not done on this topic. We're going to return in December with more with Dr. DeClerck, but I think that's we need to wrap it up for this episode. So, Dr. DeClerck, thank you for joining us, and make sure you like this episode and share it with somebody so that they can learn the knowledge you have also. Until next time, keep innovating the cattle industry. Signing off. If you truly want your livestock to perform at their best, make sure to contact Vance Aaron, the owner and operator of AFL Livestock Solutions. Vance specializes in magnawave treatments that use pulsed electromagnetic fields, or PEMF, to relieve pain, swelling, and inflammation, caused to help your livestock feel their best. In addition to livestock, Vance can also help you feel better. His treatment works great on sore muscles and joints, along with other mobility issues. His treatments are FDA approved to treat migraines. Aaron Family Livestock Solutions has helped many exhibitors make it to the backdrop with their proven MagnaWave treatments. Don't miss your next backdrop picture. Give Vance a call at 903-720-3184. Again, that's 903-720-3184. or find them on Facebook at AFL Livestock Solutions. Thank you for listening to the Cattle Innovation Station podcast.
We hope you enjoyed the show.
We're your hosts, Baxter Whitworth.
And Paul Hayes.
Remember our key verse, Proverbs 16:3.
Commit to the Lord whatever you do, and He will establish your plans.
Thank you for listening. Hello guys, thank you for listening to the Cattle Innovation Station podcast. We want to make this podcast better. So if you would, please like this episode and leave us feedback in the comment section. Something else that helps make this podcast better is when you respond to the polls. So if you're able, please respond to our polls. Help us make this podcast as good as possible. Thank you, God bless, and have a good day.